An organization for years has gotten it so wrong so often in a draft. And as a result, they've put themselves in a position where they have to compensate and overcompensate at that for those failures in the draft and in talent evaluation and development of young talent, to where they have to make costly moves both via trade and free agency to try and compensate for those mistakes on the draft end and in the talent evaluation and development portion, which ends up leading to an overpaid, overrated, overaged, overhyped, underproducing roster that continuously fools you into believing that bigger things are possible because of these big name players that you have, that, mind you, are brought in mostly based off of past accomplishments and achievements, and what they're being paid is not matching the current reality of who they are. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? It's exactly what I was saying about the Chicago Cubs about 5 years ago. And it's the exact same thing I'm saying about the Chicago Bears now, and I've been saying for a couple of years. And this 2014 season has to be that tipping point. This 2014 season has to be that no more moment, to where everybody involved with the Chicago Bears understands, from the top down and the fan base and the media surrounding the team, that it's not going to get any better, just like it didn't for the Chicago Cubs. It is only going to get worse. The longer you continue on the same path in the same cycle to get the same results, yet expecting those same actions to produce any different, more positive results, is just foolishness. And all it's doing is continuing that cycle of mediocrity and punting the ball down the road. It was a problem for the Cubs about 4 or 5 years back, and it's a problem for the Chicago Bears now. And just like the Chicago Cubs reached that tipping point where they said, enough is enough, we can't continue down this path anymore, it is time to undergo a full and complete necessary rebuild and change in philosophy of everything that they do as an organization. The Chicago Bears have now reached that point, in my opinion. Frankly, they've been there for a couple of years, but I think now, as the Bears sit at this moment in 2014 at 3-6, with an overrated, overaged, overpaid, overhyped, underproducing roster, I think more than ever it's clear to everyone involved with this organization that that's what has to occur. Because the longer this team continues down this same path with the same actions to produce the same results, all they're doing is further burying this organization in more cycle of mediocrity and punting the necessary rebuild down the road and making things worse for even more years to come. It's time to wake up, people. The Chicago Bears need a complete and total rebuild. When you look at this current roster, 13 of the 53 active roster members are age 30 or older. That's pretty much a quarter of your roster are age 30 or older. When you're that old of a team and you're not in a contending position, that's a bad thing. That means you have overpaid for players based off of past accomplishments and past achievements, and they are underproducing compared to the contract and name that they have. And what's really scary about it is you've got several other players on this roster that are 29, so they'll be 30 next year. And what's even more scary about it and frightening about it is the fact that some of the biggest stars and some of these so-called best players, and most of these so-called stars and best players on the Bears team, are all 29 or older. Matt Forte is 29. Brandon Marshall's 30. Jermon Bushrod's 30. Tim Jennings is 31. Jay Cutler's 31. DJ Williams is 32. Jared Allen is 32. Jay Ratliff is 33. Lance Briggs is 34. Roberto Garza is 35. The Bears are old. And they're both old in a bad way. And they're old in a lot of the wrong places to be old. In fact, out of those 18 players that I just mentioned, and actually if you want to go into, there's two other players on injured reserve, and Peanut Tillman and Zach Miller, they're also 30 or older. Out of those 20 players, 11 of them rank among the 13 highest paid Chicago Bears. Just like what you saw happen in the past with the Chicago Cubs. Failures in the draft lead to overcompensating for those failures via trade and free agency. It's the same formula that the Cubs used to their failure for years of mediocrity. It's the same formula the Bears are using to produce the same results. It's bad, people, and it's not going to get any better. And a major reason, again, for the failure of the Cubs over the years and the failure of the Bears now is the failure to properly draft. It's the failure to properly evaluate talent. It's the failure to properly develop said young talent. When you look at the Chicago Bears, they don't have a single player left from either the 2009 or 2010 draft. Technically, the only player you could argue that they have left from either one of those drafts is Jay Cutler, because they traded the first-round pick of both of those drafts to get Jay Cutler. When Jay Cutler is your only player left from two of your drafts, that's not a good thing. I assure you, and you understand this. In terms of Jerry Angelo's last draft in 2011 as general manager, there's only two players left. That's Stephen Paille and Chris Conte. I don't need to say any more. And then you look at Phil Emery and his time as general manager and the drafts under him. You look at 2012, his first draft. There's only two players left, by God. Two! From a draft that just occurred 2 years ago. And out of those two players, one is a good number 2 wide receiver in Alshon Jeffrey, and the other one is a complete and total bust in Shane McClellan that you have tried to convert him into a strong side linebacker to try to salvage something out of the pick where he's so bad, you're either A, probably going to cut him at the end of the season, or you're going to trade him off for a 6th or 7th round pick. You look at his 2013 draft, you got 2 starters out of it. A 26-year-old now right guard in Kyle Long, and a mediocre right tackle in the 5th round in Jordan Mills. It's not good, people. It's just terrible. Phil Emery is Jerry Angelo. Jerry Angelo is Phil Emery. The point is, there's no goddamn difference. Terrible talent evaluations, piss poor drafting, leading to overcompensating in the trade and free agent market, producing an overrated, overpaid, overaged, overhyped, underproducing roster. Does that sound familiar, Chicago fans? You're damn right it does. Because that was the reality of the Chicago Cubs, and it most certainly is the reality of the Chicago Bears here and now. Look at the long-term building blocks on this team. Where the fuck are they? What do you got on offense? Alshon Jeffrey, Martellus Bennett, Kyle Long, and Jordan Mills. So a good number 2 wide receiver, a tight end who's a mental case who will be 28 next year, that by the time you actually got that full rebuild done in 4 to 5 seasons, and it would take that long, he again would be on the wrong side of 30. Kyle Long, a right guard who is 26 years old this year. So by the time you got done with that rebuild, he'd be 30 years old. And again, if you're talking about one of your key building blocks on offense is a right guard, you're in a bad way, in a very bad way. And then what, Jordan Mills, a mediocre right tackle? That's what you got on offense. And then look at defense. You've basically got Lamar Houston, who's got a big contract, who is incredibly underproduced, and oh, by the way, decides he likes to hurt himself is doing sack celebrations late in the 4th quarter of a game where his team is down more than 20 points. And he'll be 28 next year. He probably won't see the end of his contract. And even if he did, even if you were building the defense around him, if you're building a defense around Lamar Houston, you're in a bad way. And he would also be on the wrong side of 30 by the time that rebuild was done. And then you've got Kyle Fuller, who's a stud, who's everything that I thought he was going to be. Those are your building blocks. Your best building block, technically, is a number 2 wide receiver in Alshon Jeffrey and a cornerback. It ain't good. It's not getting any better. The Bears must begin the rebuilding process. Not a half-ass rebuild, a complete and total tear down of the walls and everything type of rebuild, similar to what the Chicago Cubs began a few seasons ago. That means these older players, they've got to cut, they've got to trade, get whatever they can for them. They've got to move on. Because the longer they keep these players in the fold, the longer they're going to fool themselves and their fan base into thinking that they will be better than what they ultimately will be. Ladies and gentlemen, the truth is, again, the Chicago Bears suck. They are mediocre. They are only going to get worse before it gets any better. And the longer you wait, as I argued after 2012 should happen, And it didn't. And what has happened, exactly what I said was going to happen, is that you were going to punt the ball down the road, foolishly believing that you were going to be a contender when that was not the case. You were going to end up with an overpaid, overrated, overaged, overhyped, underproducing roster like we have right now here in 2014 with the 3-6 Chicago Bears team. You trade Marshall, get whatever you can, mid, late round pick, whatever. Same thing with Bushrod, same thing with Jennings, same thing with Martellus Bennett. You have to do this. You have to cut Cutler. Or if you find somebody stupid enough to give you a 7th round pick to pick up some of his contract, so be it. You have to move on from Cutler no matter what. Damn the consequences, both salary cap and otherwise. Because you are not going to win a championship with this guy. This has been clearly established. Because more often than not, you can't even sniff the playoffs with this guy. So the longer you stick with him in the fold, you're going to continue to foolishly believe that you have to validate giving a guy Aaron Rodgers money when he can't beat Aaron Rodgers. The longer you keep Cutler in the fold, the longer you're just going to exacerbate the problems and make it worse. The roster has to be totally blown up. It must be. It's the only shot that this organization has to undergo the full and complete rebuild that it needs. And they must also clean house from the very top on down. Now, obviously, you can't just change ownership unless the McCaskies had a change of heart and decided they wanted to sell the team, and God, what a godsend that would be. But it's probably not going to happen. But you can get rid of everybody else. Ted Phillips must go. This is the guy who's stuck around because of the fact that he got the Soldier Field Stadium deal done over a decade ago. The same Soldier Field Stadium deal that did not feature a retractable roof, which means the city of Chicago misses out on the potential of hosting the Final Four every year, WrestleMania every year, lots of concerts every year that go to other big stadiums with domes. They haven't had the Super Bowl yet. All of these things. So even the one thing that is like Ted Phillips' claim to fame, he still fucked up. He still found a way to be so typical Chicago Bears about it. And he's also the asshole that hired Jerry Angelo after hiring a headhunter service to go find a general manager. He's also the guy, mind you, that hired Phil Emery. He's public enemy number one to the Chicago Bears becoming a championship contending team. If he's got to go, that means the guys he hired and Phil Emery must go. Ooh, the guys he hired and Mark Trestman and his coaching staff, they must go. And just like what the Cubs did in terms of going and finding Theo Epstein and allowing him to put the infrastructure in place, that is exactly what the Chicago Bears must do. It must happen. Keeping Phillips and Emery and Trestman anymore is foolishness. It is madness. And it is only punting the ball down the road because you're eventually going to have to fucking do it anyways. So why wait? Where does the Bears rebuilding process begin? Again, it's a necessary rebuilding process that begins with finding a team president. I don't care if you've got to kick the cobwebs off of Ron Wolf. You got to kick the cobwebs off of Bill Polian. If you got to go try and steal somebody else's guy, whether that's Ted Thompson from the Green Bay Packers or Ozzie Newsome from the Baltimore Ravens or John Schneider from the Seattle Seahawks, talking about those general managers, do what you did with the Red Sox. Epstein was their GM. You brought him in. You promoted him, made him team president. It must happen. You must find that guy that can put that championship type of organizational infrastructure in place. Let them find the general manager. Then in terms of head coach, to me, the guy that stands out right now is Jim Harbaugh. After so many guys in Chicago, the Durans, the Smiths, the Trestmans that kind of act the same, they talk the same, they conduct themselves the same. The Bears need a bit of a red ass as a coach. They need a guy that can ruffle some feathers. They need a guy with some goddamn passion. And that's what Harbaugh brings. But he could also bring in the type of quality coaching staff that this Bears organization would need. And an offensive coordinator like Greg Roman, a defensive coordinator like Vic Fangio, who would force the Bears to finally, once and for all, catch up with the fucking modern times of 21st century NFL and switch the team to a 3-4 defense. Then you go find your quarterback. And you build around that quarterback. And to all you dipshits that don't get it, Jay Cutler is not that fucking guy. He is 31 years old. He is who he's always been, and he's not going to get better. He's only going to get worse, as you Nimrods have seen this year. The bottom line is just like the Chicago Cubs, the Bears have reached that point, in my opinion. Frankly, they were there a couple of years ago, but everybody else that isn't me is a fucking idiot and didn't see it. This team needs to be blown up. They need to be completely destroyed and dismantled and slowly built back up again. Hope is springing eternal for Cubs fans. The future is looking bright. How does the future look for the Bears? It could look bright again, but drastic change must happen now.